The wind cut across the old graveyard like a blade of ice. I stood before a crumbled stone whose name had long been devoured by moss, and I whispered into the frost, Marie Antoinette was not the first woman whose suffering was rewritten, nor the last truth burned in silence. The earth below seemed to tremble, as if something buried there still remembered. And so I began the story of the woman whose fate predated the Queen. By more than a century, a story England tried to erase before it crossed the sea and infected the world. The year was somewhere between 1600 and the coming of the plague years, when winter on the moors pressed down like a curse. Smoke drifted from the distant roofs of London, where bells tolled endlessly for the dying. Rats clawed through grain barrels. Families boarded their doors shut. Entire streets choked on the stench of sickness. And in the villages north of the city, fear traveled faster than disease, especially fear of women who knew too much. Lady Evelyn Harrow lived on the edge of one such village, in a manor swallowed by ivy and mist. She was a noblewoman by birth, but she spent her days among the poor, tending to the coughing, the fevered, the trembling. Her gift and curse was the strange way she could see what others hid. A shake in the hand, the quiver of a breath, a shadow behind the eyes. To Evelyn, fear glowed like a lantern. Suffering echoed like a distant bell only she could hear. She sensed it before it arrived. She warned families before loved ones collapsed. And when the plague began its slow crawl toward her village, she was the only one who refused to run. People whispered she did not fear the plague because it feared her. When a small boy, no more than 6, collapsed on the muddy road with blood at his lips, it was Evelyn who carried him into her home. The villagers had already stepped back, crossing themselves. No one wished to touch the dying. No one wished to risk contamination. But Evelyn boiled her herbs, crushed bitter roots, and stayed awake through 3 moonlit nights, pressing cool cloths to the child's burning forehead. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. The miracle should have saved her. Instead, it doomed her. The boy's mother, trembling with gratitude, whispered in the marketplace that Lady Evelyn had healed him with leaves and murmured prayers. Within hours, the story twisted. By nightfall, the village gutters carried a new rumor: no woman heals the plague unless she caused it. Fear made clergymen courageous. The local priest, Father Aldrich, a man whose sermons grew louder each time his influence waned, seized the opportunity. He stood before the frightened townspeople and declared that the plague had come because a witch walked among them. A woman too educated, too serene, too observant. Satan hides behind beauty, he thundered, and wisdom is his disguise. Evelyn heard her fate in the distance, carried on the wind long before the men arrived. They broke down her door at dawn. She did not resist, not even when her wrists were bound with rope coarse enough to bleed her skin. Her loyal maid screamed for mercy, but Evelyn only lifted her chin, her eyes calm. She seemed more saddened than afraid, as if the moment had always been waiting for her, like a chapter already written. They dragged her through the frost-lined streets while villagers peered from shutter cracks. Children hid behind barrels, dogs barked and then shrank away. Evelyn kept her gaze forward. Only once did she look back, toward the boy she had saved. He stood barefoot in the doorway, tears streaking down his cheeks. She managed a fragile smile before they pulled her out of sight. The prison beneath the priest's house was carved of cold stone, lit only by a single candle flame that clung desperately to life. Chains clattered as they bound her ankles. The walls were wet with the breath of centuries. Evelyn listened to the drip of water, the scurrying of rats, the soft whisper of her own heartbeat. The narrator, I must confess something here, nothing written in the official archives contains Evelyn Harrow's name. Her trial is absent, her death unrecorded. The church erased her more thoroughly than the plague erased the poor. Only one relic of her final days survived, hidden in code, a folded scrap of parchment discovered decades later behind a rotting wooden plank in an abandoned colonial courtroom. But let me not outrun the story. Her trial was a performance, conducted not to seek truth, but to justify a verdict already carved in stone. Father Aldrich accused her of consorting with the devil. The councilmen demanded she confess how she had summoned the pestilence. Evelyn answered softly, I did not bring death. I tried to keep it from your doors. But mercy was not welcome in such chambers. Her real crime was simpler. She was a woman who refused to be ignorant. The sentence was decided before her shackles were forged. They led her to the pyre at dusk. Wind whipped the torches so violently that sparks danced like angry stars. Eveline's hair, unbound and tangled from the cell, blew across her face. Yet her eyes, those strange, knowing eyes, stared straight into the horizon, as if watching something unfold that the rest of them could not see. Just before the flames licked her feet, she spoke her final words, a whisper carried by the wind, caught only by the terrified village woman standing nearest the pyre. Across the sea, across the centuries, more will suffer as I do, and their names will vanish as mine will vanish. The villagers stepped back, some crossed themselves, others turned away. The fire climbed higher, swallowing her silhouette in a column of heat and light. When the smoke settled, the ashes scattered across the cold English earth. Her body was gone, her memory erased. The official record remained silent. But somewhere in that silence, a truth survived. Snow settled over Salem like a burial shroud. The rooftops were pale with frost, the chimneys exhaling thin streams of smoke, and the church bells tolled with a cold urgency that made every heartbeat feel like a warning. Villagers walked with their breath hanging before them in trembling clouds, as if even the air feared what it carried. In 1692, every cry of a child, every sudden illness, every misfortune was blamed on a woman's curse. And it was in this frozen tension that Martha Hale walked. The granddaughter of a woman England had burned to ash and silence. Martha had come to the New World as a girl no more than 8, clutching a scrap of linen embroidered with her grandmother Eveline's initials. Her mother had died on the voyage, her father never spoke of the past, but the Harrow blood flowed quietly in her, carrying the same unsettling intuition, the way she sensed fear before it was spoken, the way she saw danger in a flicker of someone's eyes. In Salem, such a gift was not admired, it was feared. By the first heavy snow, Martha noticed a pattern in the new accusations spreading through the village like wildfire. The same families who had avoided the sick during England's plague years were now the loudest voices in condemning their neighbors. The same elders who quivered before power were now delivering righteous sermons about invisible evil. The same young girls who once played freely in the fields were being dragged away in tears, their innocence traded for safety. It was not hysteria, it was a cycle, a script, a cruelty she recognized even if no one else did. One morning, as Martha passed the meeting house, she saw strange symbols carved into the frost-covered wood, circles intersecting with jagged lines, shapes she had only seen once before. Her breath froze in her lungs. Those markings had been recorded in the last days of Eveline Harrow, symbols etched around the priest's chambers in England during the plague years. A warning, perhaps, or a claim of ownership. Now they appeared in a new land, on another frontier of fear. Whispers followed her for days. That Hale woman knows more than a woman should. She never cries during sermons. Her eyes look right through you. Men nodded, as if her calmness was proof of guilt. Women avoided her gaze. Children scattered when she walked by. Martha felt the noose tightening long before the rope ever touched her skin. Still, she refused to let the past devour the innocent again. When she discovered a trembling young girl named Abigail hiding behind the woodpile near her home, cheeks raw, hair tangled, wrists bruised, Martha took her in without hesitation. The girl's family had accused her of witchcraft to appease the court and protect themselves. It was a betrayal only the desperate could commit. Martha wrapped the girl in blankets, fed her broth, and held her as she sobbed through the night. And when dawn came, she led Abigail to a secret cellar she had prepared near the edge of the woods, hidden beneath a half-rotted trapdoor and covered with dried leaves. It became a refuge for the hunted. Within weeks, 3 more girls hid there, shaking in the dim candlelight as Martha smuggled them bread and whispered that they were safe. But kindness in Salem was a dangerous act. Mercy was seen as rebellion, and soon eyes began to watch her not with suspicion, but with purpose. The final blow came when a judge from Boston arrived, carrying a leather-bound packet of documents wrapped tightly with cord. During his sermon in the meeting house, he laid the papers before the congregation and declared them proof that evil traveled in families. Martha froze as the man untied the cord. The parchment was old, blotched with soot, written in a hand she recognized from stories whispered by her mother. They were court papers stolen from Eveline Harrow's trial in England. Fabricated confessions, twisted accounts, lies mortared together to justify a death, and now those same exact words, repeated verbatim, were used against the women of Salem. It was no hysteria, it was a method, a tool, a weapon carried across oceans, sharpened by fear, wielded by men who thrived when women could not speak. Martha felt the truth swallow her breath. The shadow that had consumed her grandmother had followed her lineage across the sea. Her fate was sealed the moment a villager spotted one of the girls she had hidden slipping out to fetch water. The girl was caught by the wrist and dragged through the village square, screaming Martha's name. Snow fell onto her tangled hair as she begged for mercy. The crowd surged forward, eager for spectacle, hungry for righteousness. The child's cries echoed off the frozen church walls. Martha did not hesitate. She stepped through the crowd, positioned herself between the girl and the men holding her, and said, with a calmness that struck the crowd like a slap, "She is innocent." Those 3 words carried more danger than any accusation. Hands seized Martha at once. She was dragged to the meeting house cellar, thrown against a cold stone wall, and tied so tightly her wrists burned raw. In the darkness, she heard the murmurs of the council above her, her name, her family line, her blood, questions twisted into accusations, silence distorted into guilt. By midnight, they hauled her into a chamber lit with candles and prepared for interrogation. Her answers did not matter. Pain tore through her, blows, cold water, ropes tightened to force confessions she never made. When her voice grew too weak to deny the lies, they wrote her words for her. When she closed her eyes to escape, they accused her of praying to the devil. And when she whispered for the girls she had saved, the robed council nodded to each other, declaring that her grandmother's execution in England was evidence that the Harrow women carried a curse. Exhausted, trembling, barely conscious, Martha was given a minute alone, watched only by a bored guard leaning against the wall. With numb fingers, she reached for a piece of charcoal discarded near the hearth and traced a shaky message on the plank behind her. Not all queens die in palaces. Some die unnamed, in places where the truth is forbidden. A message meant for anyone who would listen, for anyone who could still read courage in the cracks of wood and the stains of history. But no one ever opened those records. No one ever read her plea. And so her words, like her grandmother's, vanished into the silence that powerful men built to bury the women they feared. Cold October wind coiled around the stone walls of the conciergerie like a living thing, slipping through cracks, whispering along the floors, trailing down the dim corridors where footsteps had not yet faded. Night hung over Paris like a shroud. The prison breathed darkness, its torches sputtering with a tired glow, casting long, skeletal shadows across the damp stones. I walked those halls in silence, the camera of memory drifting ahead of me like a ghost, turning corners, passing locked iron doors, and settling finally on the narrow cell where a queen waited to die. Marie Antoinette had been reduced to a pale figure wrapped in coarse cloth, her once bright eyes dulled with exhaustion, her hair hacked unevenly by guards who enjoyed cruelty more than duty. Chains rattled softly against the wall each time she shifted. The official records say she was treated with dignity, watched over respectfully, given moments of prayer. That is the story France chose to keep. But a missing chapter existed, tucked once inside a leather journal, written by the last woman who spoke with her freely. Charlotte Hale, an English-born healer who had fled Salem with a legacy of grief and a new name stitched onto her identity. Charlotte entered the cell for the first time with her head bowed, pretending to be nothing more than a quiet helper. But inside her, 3 generations of terror stirred. Evelyn Harrow burned in England. Martha Hale crushed in Salem, and now another woman, more royal but no less human, facing judgment shaped by fear rather than truth. Charlotte recognized the pattern instantly, as though history were a wheel turning relentlessly, grinding the innocent beneath it. Marie lifted her head when Charlotte approached, studying her with wary eyes. "You are not like the others," she said softly. Charlotte knelt beside her, neither were they. From that night forward, Charlotte tended to the queen in stolen minutes, changing her bandages, passing her sips of water, whispering comfort into the stone-cold silence. She wrote everything down later, her candle flickering in the narrow corridor as she recorded the Queen's last nights with trembling ink. The truth was far more savage than the polished narratives recited centuries later. Marie slept no more than minutes at a time, her body chained by wrists and ankles so tightly that the metal cut into her skin. Guards tapped their boots on the stone floor just outside her door to keep her awake, mocking her frayed nerves. On certain nights, they dragged other accused women down the corridor, allowing their screams to echo past the Queen's cell, laughter following closely behind. The torture was not physical alone. It was psychological, orchestrated carefully to crush her spirit. Charlotte documented how the Queen's meals grew smaller with each passing day. First a bowl of broth, then half a crust of bread, then nothing at all. The starvation was designed to break her mind before her body was taken to the scaffold. When Charlotte tried to argue for mercy, a guard slammed her against the wall and snarled, "She'll die sooner or later. Better sooner." One night, hours before the dawn of Marie's execution, Charlotte found her sitting up, trembling violently, though the cell was not cold. "They will not let me sleep," Marie whispered, her voice cracked with exhaustion. "Every time I close my eyes, they shout, they want me to go mad before I die." Charlotte took her hand, but the Queen flinched, not from pain but from something deeper, something she had not shared yet. Charlotte waited. Marie's breath shuddered. "There is something they made me endure today. It will not be written. They will say my last hours were dignified." Tears welled but did not fall. It was not dignity they gave me. Charlotte never wrote the details of that final humiliation in full. She only hinted at it, an act stripped from the official record, and cruelty so vile that even the revolutionaries who despised the Queen refused to let it stain their pages. But Charlotte heard it. She held the Queen as she shook beneath the weight of it. And then, as if some invisible veil had lifted, Marie looked at her with startling clarity. "Women like us," she whispered, "we have been hunted for centuries. England, Salem, now France. Different flags, same fear, same men who need monsters to justify their power." Charlotte felt the truth pierce her chest. She saw her grandmother's face in the smoke of an English pyre. She saw her mother's charcoal message in a Salem cellar. She saw the way truth died the same death in every generation. Fear of a woman who would not bow was the oldest plague in the world. Before dawn, Charlotte wrote down the Queen's final confession, how the trial had been rigged, the witnesses coached, the verdict chosen before evidence was even gathered. The court had never wanted truth, it had wanted a symbol to slaughter. Marie asked for one thing, one final message to be carried beyond the walls. Charlotte risked everything to get close, leaned in so the guards would not hear, and the Queen spoke her last unbroken thought, words sharp enough to echo for centuries. "A kingdom falls when it chooses fear over a woman's truth." The sight of her as they led her away stayed etched in Charlotte's memory. Marie's body was thin, her hands trembling, her hair a tangled ruin, yet she walked with an eerie calm. The crowd jeered, spat, shouted filthy curses, but the Queen did not look at them. She looked at the sky. Charlotte watched from a distance as the blade fell. It did not silence her, it only transferred her voice into Charlotte's hands. For 2 days after the execution, Charlotte walked the streets of Paris like a ghost herself, clutching the leather-bound journal beneath her shawl. She felt watched, followed. The officials had sensed that something was wrong, too many whispers, too much attention paid by the quiet English healer. And on the evening of the 3rd day, her shadow vanished from the streets entirely. Some said she escaped the city. Others believed she was thrown into the Seine and sank beneath its black waters. Not a single witness stepped forward. Silence, once again, swallowed a Harrow woman whole. The journal she had filled with Marie Antoinette's final truths did not survive intact. It was seized, burned in a courtyard behind the courthouse, its ashes scattered on the wind like the remains of countless women before her. But one page survived, a single sheet that fluttered loose and wedged itself between 2 stones before the flames could claim it. The page that sits before me now, fragile at its edges, ink barely clinging to its fibers. It carries the Queen's final message, written in Charlotte's careful hand. It carries the lineage of truth that passed from grandmother to mother to daughter. It carries the echo that has tried, time and time again, to rise above the roar of history. And as I read it, The wind outside the prison walls seems to still itself, listening. And not a single page in the Empire's history dared to write their names again.